I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes talking to you about my literature review, which is on how doctors learn about diagnostic error. I wanted to do this because I wanted to deepen my understanding of diagnostic error and get a broad perspective on things. I didn't want to focus on a narrow area, so I've chosen to do a literature review. The literature is tricky because there's a lot of empirical and theoretical literature to sift through, but the diagnostic error literature, the prevalent stuff is empirical, but the rest is largely theoretical, conjecture and opinion based. And the key points from that are the definition, the causes of diagnostic error and the contributing factors, and the solutions. And the important thing there is the contributing factors, which is a combination of cognitive and system factors, and the solutions, which are hugely varied. The issues are, as I said, that a lot of the literature is opinion-based, that there's no use of wider models of human error. There's quite a narrow focus, which reflects a small authorship in the academic papers about diagnostic error, that the patient safety crossover with diagnostic error, despite, to me as a clinician, being clearly related, is largely unexplored. They talk about system factors, but there's no pulling in of what's been learned and suggested about patient safety solutions to look at diagnostic error. So the summary points about diagnostic error is it's a failure in process leading to a delayed, missed or incorrect diagnosis. It's multifactorial in origin, and the solutions vary and aren't clear, and more empirical research, evidence-based, is required, but that's acknowledged in the literature. And that error literature is not drawn upon, nor is patient safety. So the next thing that I looked at was workplace learning as a separate entity. Workplace learning, again, there's both theoretical and empirical data, and the key things that I have read are that there is explicit and implicit learning. And workplace learning addresses how knowledge is acquired for use in the workplace rather than how we learn, and it's a different perspective on learning to what I've been used to in the rest of the MClinEd and other literature about learning. It does use the behavioural cognitive constructivist framework, but it's not the focus. The focus is on implicit learning, which is unintentional, incidental, and part of the experience of work, and explicit learning, which is roughly the equivalent to CPD, but a formal learning experience. A lot of the empirical studies in workplace learning are about skill-based workplaces, which, although useful in medicine, is not directly translatable to diagnostic error. Diagnosis is a skill, but it's not a mechanical skill. So when I say skill-based, I mean a physical skill. And diagnosis and diagnostic error revolve around knowledge and process. And the term for the kind of knowledge I'm meant to be using has slipped my mind, but it is 10 o'clock at night. Expertise is important in medicine, according to workplace learning, but it's not addressed as much as I would like. And it's largely addressed through looking at communities of practice and how other people become expert, rather than how experts become expert, remain expert and stay expert, which is clearly very important in medicine. So, in summary about workplace learning, implicit learning is the primary source of knowledge for workers. Implicit learning occurs during work by the interactions and the events of work, and this reflects a fairly social construct of workplace learning, including that around expertise, although there is a cognitive component. Behavioural learning patterns are much less important, particularly with regards to diagnostic error, although they're useful for doctors. But below the elbows is probably a fairly behaviourally learned pattern. So once I've explored diagnostic error and workplace learning, the idea is to then look at how workplace learning can inform diagnostic error, be useful for the entire phenomenon of diagnostic error and to look at how it can be most useful. So workplace learning sets its store by implicit learning, learning on the job, by the job. This says that in order to help with the problem of diagnostic error, it needs to be part and parcel of our day-to-day jobs. So we need to raise awareness, which is currently low, use expertise, and again there are a few of those, and get people engaged in it. And because the level of knowledge about diagnostic error is fairly low, engagement is low. So to pull back at the current situation, we need to learn about diagnostic error through implicit learning, and therefore if we assume that an increase in knowledge will help decrease the impact of diagnostic error, then we need to be able to engineer implicit learning. So then it's how you can engineer the work environment to encourage and enable implicit learning. And the literature talks about this on an individual basis, how to help an individual improve their workplace learning, but it doesn't talk about how to do this on an organisational or regional or national level. And given that diagnostic error is an international problem and recognised as such, we need to address both things, both how to make implicit learning occur on an individual level and to make how it will work on a more global level. So how to raise awareness, there's an organisational aspect to that, and expertise, how to make people experts, and that may well be through explicit learning and repeated implicit learning experiences, and how to get people engaged, and again that needs to be organisational. A rider on this is clearly at the moment doctors are aware of diagnostic error, but the literature suggests that we all underestimate diagnostic error, particularly the ones that we ourselves make. So the aim of helping diagnostic error is to raise its profile and change the way that it's thought about and considered and addressed, and not just in an evolutionary fashion, but in a revolutionary fashion, i.e. to make a step change. The other way that workplace learning informs how to help diagnostic error is that we can improve explicit learning. So although workplace learning focuses on implicit learning as being the main driver for learning, there's an acknowledgement that explicit learning is important. And explicit learning is clearly a way that you can start to build expertise, and you can increase knowledge generally at all levels. The issues about using workplace learning to improve diagnostic error relate to diagnosis and diagnostic error being a generic skill. So we have quite good mechanisms for speciality skills, but less good mechanisms for how we're going to make generic skills work, particularly at a more senior level. As I said, workplace learning engaging at regional, national, government levels is much less featured in the literature I read, and so ownership of the problem both by clinicians and by organisations is difficult. Conclusion. So diagnostic error is a difficult area to research because empirical data is lacking, although there is a lot of theoretical data and a lot of momentum behind it as a problem. Momentum as evidenced by increasing numbers of papers, discussions, conferences, and grants made to bodies seeking to do empirical research. And workplace learning suggests that implicit knowledge is the key, but manipulating workplace learning to enable implicit learning is difficult and not well addressed in the literature. It suggests it's possible, but it probably needs high-level engagement. The end.